So Roe v. Wade was overturned, ostensibly making abortion illegal in much of the United States. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Aaron, this is my show Re-Education, and today we're going to talk about the Supreme Court's ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade. So for a little bit of context here, Roe v. Wade was essentially a Supreme Court ruling, a landmark decision, that determined that women in America should be allowed to have the freedom and bodily autonomy to choose whether or not they want to have an abortion. And the Republican-dominated Supreme Court basically just turned that on its head and decided that women don't have a right to their own bodies, and the courts get to decide whether or not they get to choose to have an abortion or not. Claiming, apparently, that abortion is murder, which I want to point out the hypocrisy here, though pointing out hypocrisy doesn't really fucking change anything, that Republicans usually believe that abortion is murder, but sending children to fight in a war and die is patriotism. Now, a lot of liberals are out there saying, oh, well, this is something that happened because of the Republicans, and a lot of conservatives are, of course, doing a victory lap, claiming that nobody should have to get an abortion, even in cases where the pregnancy could cause the death of the mother, rape, incest, or really any other thing. Some, like Count Dankula, the Nazi pug guy, even going so far as to say that if we wore masks for 2 years, then it should be easy for you to wear a condom for 48 seconds. Which completely disregards the aforementioned rape, incest, and pregnancy that could cause death of the mother. You know, considering that Republicans like to claim that they're so anti-incest and anti-rape, they sure do like to fall on the side of those individuals, don't they? Now, as for the claim of this being the Republicans' fault, I want to stress that this happened under a Democratic president, a democratically elected House, Senate, and it doesn't really matter, because what we're seeing here is the ratchet effect in real time. Now, a lot of people, of course, were out a few years ago claiming that if Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, that Roe would be overturned and abortion would be made illegal. Specifically, Vosh, Ian, made this statement, and it turns out that even under a Democratic president like Joe Biden, abortion still became illegal. Now, that isn't shocking. It shouldn't be surprising to anyone, at least anybody that's following along, that what we're seeing right now is exactly what was expected to happen. Democrats had years, in fact decades, to make Roe v. Wade a permanent fixture in the United States Constitution, and chose not to, opting instead to use it as a political tool to win votes every so often. But worse than that, there are so many different layers on how they actually work towards holding back any progress we could make on this subject by doing things like not really fighting that hard to make sure that Merrick Garland, who was going to be the Supreme Court nominee for the Obama administration, to actually get into the Supreme Court. Whereas the Republicans, under almost identical circumstances, fought tooth and nail to allow Brett Kavanaugh, a serial rapist of over 15 women, to easily get onto that Supreme Court and make these decisions. Now, of course, we could go back even further and say that Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have stepped down from the Supreme Court and allowed somebody newer and younger and ostensibly more left-leaning to get into a position of power on the Supreme Court, and of course didn't do that. So, yeah, some blame can be placed there. But the majority of the blame here has to be placed on the system itself, because this is exactly how the system works. Like I mentioned, the ratchet effect a few moments ago. The ratchet effect is essentially the idea that every time a Republican president gets into power, or Republicans gain control of a lot of the government, that they usually push policy and law towards the right. Whereas every time a Democrat becomes president or holds a substantial amount of power in the government, they do everything they can to make sure that policy and law doesn't get pushed any further to the left. Like a ratchet. It only goes one way, and it's stopped every time it tries to go back towards the other direction. And this really shouldn't be surprising or shocking to anyone. If you have a reasonable understanding of how the government works, we can see that every single time there's a opportunity for the state to gain more control, or for the capitalists and the owner class to gain a little bit more power, they're going to do that. And the Democrats and the Republicans are both going to fight on their side. And who is it that's in control and in power? Well, capitalists, obviously, but also the religious right, right-wing extremists, and the state. And interestingly, the state actually tends to gain quite a bit when they make things like abortion illegal. For instance, having more babies born means that there will be more people to fight in their wars. And it kind of seems like they may be pushing the idea of having more children because more children means more soldiers, and they might be preparing for a large war. Now, whether or not this war is going to be with Russia, China, or their own people, that's really hard to say. What is clear is that there is going to be more people and more soldiers. Oh, and also, who else benefits from large amounts of people? Well, I assume someone that would like to have a larger workforce. Or to be more specific, having more people in the Reserve Army of Labor. The Reserve Army of Labor, of course, is a Marxist idea that postulates that capitalists like having a lot of poor people that are either out of work or fighting to get a job that isn't going to pay very well, so that it forces or convinces all of the people that do have jobs not to really fight all that hard to get better working conditions, because there's always going to be somebody coming up in the back end that could take their job and do it for a smaller wage or less rights. Now, is this exactly why Roe v. Wade was overturned? Well, there's no way to really know that for sure. Of course, me saying these things sounds kind of like conspiracy theory bullshit, unless, again, you have a working understanding of how this capitalist system works. So beyond that, I do want to talk a little bit about the hypocrisy and ridiculousness of it all when it comes to liberals talking about how this is going to harm women. Because it seems like they've all of a sudden forgotten that there have already been many women and people that can bear children that were already being hurt by many similar laws for a much longer time. And it didn't just happen to be white women that were being affected by it. Of course, I'm talking about the fact that women of color and LGBT people always had a harder time getting these sorts of services in the first place. And when it comes to Indigenous women and people with disabilities here in Canada or in the United States, it's not exactly even abortion that's been affecting them this whole time, but forced sterilization, as well as forced abortion when they're brought into custody for whatever reason. And the most disheartening part about this is that these liberals don't actually have any real stake in the game. They don't really see this as an actual thing that affects people in reality. Most of them kind of just see this as a fun little thought experiment that they're able to use to have Twitter fights against their Republican cousins in the DMs on Twitter. When really at the end of the day, the people that suffer the most from this are marginalized individuals who are able to have children. It's much harder for a marginalized person, a person of color, a person in the LGBT community, to actually afford the time, resources, and money to go get an abortion. And now that it's made illegal in many states, it's even harder for those people specifically to take the time off or get the money to travel across state lines to get them done elsewhere. And of course, the liberals aren't the ones that are going to have to clean up this mess. Usually it winds up falling on the hands of people like you and me, people who decide to do mutual aid and organize together to find ways to perform these medical procedures in a safe, sanitary environment in a system that has now made it illegal. Compounding that with the fact that white women overwhelmingly supported Trump in the last couple of elections really makes things complicated and really shows that a lot of these people don't actually care about the female body, bodily autonomy, or human rights, as long as it doesn't directly affect them in some way. Now, with this, of course, the liberals have started doing their peaceful protests, basically saying that they're going to march against the state and that they're going to show their representatives that they don't agree with this. And yeah, peaceful protests never actually solve anything at all. When the problem itself is with the way the system is structured, telling the people that benefit from that system that you don't like their decision really doesn't change their fucking minds, because they don't work for you. They work for them. They work for the people that decided that this legislation was the right thing to pass. Now, that isn't to say I'm telling people to go out and do violence. You can't tell people to go out and do violence on YouTube, so don't do that. But what I am saying is that anarchist organizations and anarchist organizing is really the way to solve this problem. Setting up mutual aid networks that can perform these sorts of procedures in a safe, sanitary, medically professional, and inexpensive way. Or also getting together with people who really don't like this idea and burning the motherfucker to the ground. But seriously, anarchists and leftists alike have to take a look at what's going on here and actually use this momentum to our benefit, to actually do something to change these massive problems that doesn't rely on the state or the government and individuals that are ostensibly going to do nothing. This is a time to take that very real anger and that passion that people have and use it to radicalize people, to actually make a difference, to actually make some change. And remember, we must never let liberals lead. When it comes to activism, when it comes to actions, when it comes to marching in the streets, when liberals lead the movements or they're out there in the streets doing activism, it's nothing more than milquetoast distractions from the real solution. And they will just muddy the waters and usually end up calling the cops on you. Never let liberals lead. Not in demonstrations, not in actions, never on the streets. That is up to us. And more specifically, the people that are affected by this most. Follow the lead of radical Black, Indigenous, people of color, the LGBT community, and the disabled radicals that are out there. Follow their lead. They know what to do best in this situation. They are the ones that are affected by this most. And do your best to support them. Get the biggest megaphone you have and give it to these fucking people, because they are the ones that actually know how to make real change. And never let liberals lead. It's up to us. Anyway, that's my show. My name is Aaron. If you get a chance, check out all the links in the description box below and get out there. Get active. Politics isn't a spectator sport. Politics is something you do, not just something that you post about online. So, fucking do it. Keep evolving.